In the full city of Accra, where the skyline glittered with tall buildings and the streets buzzed with life, lived a man named Yo. He was the definition of a modern-day king, intelligent, wealthy, and irresistibly attractive. At just 32, Yo owned several successful businesses and lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city. His sharp jawline, well-built body, and deep, commanding voice turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks or wealth that made him irresistible. Yo had a reputation that whispered about his charm, his mind, and his skill behind closed doors. I mean, in bed he was great. Women flocked to him, and at home, 3 maids catered to his every need, Ama, Serwaa, and Adjoa. Each one had her own beauty and skill. Ama, tall and graceful, always dressed in the latest fashion trends, her perfect makeup and confident walk leaving people in awe. Serwaa, the petite, fiery woman, was clever with words. She could outtalk anyone in the room, making her company something you enjoyed after a long day. Adjoa, quiet and reserved, kept to herself most of the time, but her presence had a soothing effect on Yo. She was the least flashy, but somehow her calm demeanor drew his attention when everything around him felt too chaotic. Unknown to Yo, the 3 women were engaged in a silent war, each one determined to win his love. They saw how women in the city would flirt with him, his phone constantly buzzing with texts and calls from admirers. Yet none of those women lived under his roof. They weren't in his space like Ama, Serwaa, and Adjoa were. They knew his habits, his moods, and even the way he liked his coffee in the morning. It was only a matter of time before one of them captured his heart, or so they thought. One evening, Yo threw a lavish party at his penthouse. The place was packed with Accra's elite, with music booming and laughter filling the air. Ama made sure she was the best-dressed woman at the party. She wore a stunning red dress that hugged her body perfectly, leaving you no choice but to notice her. Serwaa, on the other hand, focused on engaging him in deep conversation throughout the night, making him laugh with her witty remarks. Adjoa, true to her nature, stayed in the background, quietly serving drinks and making sure everything was in order. But Yo wasn't swayed by the glitz or the conversations. As the night wore on, he found himself stepping away from the noise, needing a moment to breathe. He went up to the rooftop of his penthouse, where the city lights sparkled like stars. As he stood there, taking in the view, he heard the door quietly creak open. It was Adjoa, holding a cup of tea. "I figured you might want some peace," she said softly, handing him the cup. Yo smiled, surprised but grateful. "You always seem to know what I need before I do." Adjoa said nothing, just stood beside him, letting the silence speak for them both. As they watched the city together, Yo realized how much he valued these quiet moments with her, the ones that were free from competition or expectation. The next day, the atmosphere at home changed. Ama and Serwaa noticed how Yo's attention lingered a little longer on Adjoa. Jealousy began to fester, and soon enough, it exploded. Ama confronted Serwaa first. "I've seen how you're trying to steal Yo from me," Ama spat, her eyes burning with anger. "I've worked too hard for this. You won't win." Serwaa scoffed. "Steal him. He's not some trophy, Ama. But if he was, trust me, you wouldn't stand a chance." The argument grew heated until they realized that the real threat wasn't each other, it was Adjoa. Without saying a word, the quiet maid had somehow crept into Yo's heart, and they couldn't understand how. One evening, as Yo was heading out for a business dinner, the 3 women gathered in the living room. Ama, always bold, stepped forward. "Yo, we've all served you faithfully," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's clear that you've grown close to one of us." Serwaa chimed in, "We need to know where your heart lies." Yo paused, sensing the tension in the room. He looked at each of them, knowing this moment had been building up for weeks. He took a deep breath. Yes, I've made my decision, he said slowly. And the truth is, it's Adjoa. The room went still. Ama's face twisted in shock while Serwaa looked at him with disbelief. But before they could speak, Adjoa, who had been standing in the corner, took a step forward. Yo, I appreciate everything, but she hesitated, searching for the right words. I can't stay here. The room erupted in confusion. What do you mean you can't stay? Yo asked, his voice laced with panic. I chose you. Adjoa shook her head softly, her eyes full of sorrow. I've watched you from the sidelines, Yo. I know you better than anyone in this room. And while I care for you, I can't live in a place where love is a competition. Her words hit you like a punch to the gut. He had never imagined she would refuse him. For once in his life, the man who had it all, money, looks, power, stood vulnerable, unable to grasp what was slipping away. Adjoa stepped forward, her hand briefly touching his arm. You need someone who loves you without rivalry. But I can't be that person, not in this environment. With that, she quietly left, leaving Ama, Serwaa, and Yo standing in stunned silence. The woman who had never fought for his heart had just walked away, and for the first time, Yo realized that what he truly needed wasn't found in a grand gesture or a beautiful face, but in the quiet love that couldn't survive in a world of competition. As Adjoa walked away from the penthouse that night, her footsteps echoed down the quiet street. The wind blew softly against her, carrying the distant sounds of the city. She didn't turn back. She didn't need to. She had found peace in her decision. For the first time in a long while, she felt in control, free from the tangled web of desire, competition, and manipulation that had held her. Yo stood frozen at the door, watching her disappear into the city night. His heart pounded. It wasn't just the shock that she had rejected him, no, it was deeper than that. For once, he wasn't the one in control. He had made his grand decision, expecting her to fall into his arms like everyone else. But Adjoa had been different from the start, hadn't she? Silent, steady, and seemingly indifferent to the wealth, power, and luxury that defined his world. And now, she had walked away from him, and the image of her walking into the night seared into his mind like a scar. The next day, Ama and Serwaa were still in disbelief. Ama paced the floor, her red dress swirling behind her like flames, her anger burning hotter with each passing second. How could he? After everything I've done for him. After all these years, this is how it ends, she fumed, hands clenched at her sides. Serwaa, usually full of sharp words and quick retorts, sat silently on the couch. She was no stranger to disappointment, but this was different. She had thought she had you wrapped around her finger. She had played the game perfectly, or so she had thought. She doesn't deserve him, Ama spat, breaking the silence. She's just a maid. She doesn't know how to live in his world. Serwaa looked up, her expression dark. Neither do we, she whispered. Ama stopped, with her face contorting in confusion. Serwaa continued, You chose her because she's different. Because she wasn't trying to control him, or impress him. She didn't play the game, Ama. That's why we lost. For a moment, Ama's anger faltered. The truth stung. All this time, she had believed she was competing with Serwaa, when the real competition had been someone who wasn't even trying to win. Yo, still standing by the door, could hear their conversation echoing through the penthouse. But their words barely registered. His thoughts were consumed by one person, Adjoa. He had never felt this way before. For once, he couldn't simply throw money or charm at the problem. For once, his status, his looks, his intelligence, they meant nothing. The next morning, Yo was back on the rooftop, staring out at the city. The sunlight glimmered off the glass buildings, and the air was fresh with the smell of a new day. But Yo's mind was far from the city. It was with Adjoa. He had tried calling her that night, no answer. He had texted, nothing. His pride wanted him to stop, to move on, but his heart wouldn't let him. Days turned into weeks. Amma and Serwaa, though still part of his life, had become distant. The fire between them had burned out, leaving only smoldering ashes. They still performed their duties, but the competitive edge was gone. You barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Yo found himself at a small cafe in the heart of the city. It was far from the places he usually frequented, no high-end restaurants, no private clubs. This was different. Quiet, humble. And that's where he saw her. Adjoa sat at a small table by the window, sipping tea. Her face was calm, her eyes focused on a book in front of her. She looked different here, away from the world he had tried to keep her in. She looked free. Happy. For a moment, Yo hesitated. What could he possibly say? What could he offer her now that she had tasted freedom from his world? His heart pounded in his chest as he took a step forward. Then another. Until finally, he was standing in front of her table. Adjoa looked up, her eyes meeting his. For a brief second, there was silence. The cafe seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of them in the stillness. Adjoa, Yo said softly, his voice carrying a vulnerability she had never heard before. She closed her book and tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Yo. He paused, trying to find the right words. I'm sorry. For everything. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. Sorry for what? For not seeing you. For not understanding what you wanted. For thinking I could just choose you. Adjoa's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of contemplation. And what do you think I want, Yo? He took a deep breath, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. But I want to find out. If you'll let me. For the first time since he had met her, Yo wasn't confident. He wasn't the powerful man who had everything. He was just a man, standing in front of a woman, hoping she'd give him a chance. Adjoa studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she stood up, gathering her things. Yo's heart sank, thinking she was about to walk away again. But instead, she looked at him and said, "Walk with me." Yo blinked, surprised. What? Walk with me, she repeated, slinging her bag over her shoulder. If you want to know me, Yo, it's not about where you live or what you have. It's about where you're willing to go. And so they walked. Through the bustling streets of Accra, past the noise, the lights, and the distractions. For the first time, Yo wasn't leading, he was following. And as they walked, he realized that the real journey wasn't winning her heart. It was learning how to let go of everything that had once defined him. As they disappeared into the city night, neither of them knew where the path would lead. But for the first time, Yo wasn't afraid of the unknown. Because with Adjoa by his side, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. And that was something no one had ever expected.